All right, Senator
Abraham.
Abraham, are you ready? Senator Abraham.
Yes.
Senate Bill 124 by Senator Abraham requires the Department of Education to provide student attendance data of certain students to local school governing authorities. Senator Abraham.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just kind of tell you what the bill does, and then we'll discuss the amendments that they're following. It was brought to my attention that so many students are counted as dropouts in the state of Louisiana, right? So how can we prove that they're not dropouts, that they're actually in school, whether in another public school, whether they're in a home school, whether in a non-approved home study school? And so what this bill basically does, it says the Department of Education has to give the school boards information that shows where the students are, because we believe the Department of Education should have all this information. So that's basically what my bill does. I have some amendments that after talking with many homeschoolers, okay, they had some concerns that maybe we're putting too much pressure on tracking these students. We're not trying to do that. So if you want to look at the amendments now, Senator Fields, I'll explain some of the amendments and how I believe they satisfied some of the questions by the homeschoolers.
Okay, Amendment 2550 by Senator Abraham. All right, you want Cheryl to hit it, or you want to hit the amendments? We're going to take the amendments now. You want Cheryl to hit the amendments, or you want to explain them? All right, you want to explain them, Ms. Cheryl?
Okay, Amendment 1 clarifies whose information will be provided to each public school system. So each approved application for approved home study and non-public schools that are not seeking state approval. Amendment 2 changes the requirement for the department. Before it was a monthly requirement for them to report, and now it's upon the receipt of the application or upon receipt of the enrollment information. It also, and it changes it to immediately, but it defines immediately in this section of law as well as in 17236.1A as within 30 days of receipt. It again clarifies which school systems will receive the information, and it removes certain data from the required notification that's currently there. So to kind of leave the process the department already has in place. Amendments 3 through 6 are technical. It changes the word student to child just to keep everything in the same wording as current law. And then Amendment number 7 removes language that said the department shall be responsible for ensuring their compulsory attendance of these children. It removes that, but it also, and in place of it, adds language that for these students which notification is sent to, that that the public schools are not responsible for the compulsory attendance.
So I think I understand the amendments, but I do have a question because of the, I was looking at the fiscal note, and they were saying that the department would have to increase. But is it not the department's responsibility now to keep to make sure that they keep up with the attendance of those who are in school?
No, I believe based on, of course, I'm not a lawyer, and I got some attorneys here next to me, but let me just state in law, I think this section, what is that, 227? I don't know what part of the law is this, Dan?
17227, yeah.
Okay. Supposedly, the Department of Education Committee is supposed to be tracking this already. It's in state law to do that. And it says the state superintendent of education shall appoint or designate members of the Department of Education whose primary responsibility shall be to supervise and enforce the provisions of this subpart, and who shall serve as state director and assistant state director of child welfare and attendance. The state director and assistant state directors of child welfare and attendance shall meet the certification standards set by the State Board of Education for visiting teachers or supervisors of child welfare and attendance, and shall be responsible for the general administration of this subpart. The state superintendent of education is authorized to prescribe the duties of the state director and assistant state directors of child welfare and attendance, to make such rules and regulations for the performance thereof not inconsistent with law, as will promote the purpose of this subpart. As my understanding, this is already in their purview of work. So whether they're doing it or not, I don't know. Maybe they're doing part of it. And so the purpose of this bill, again, is that if information is being sent already by the home study schools, if it's being sent to the Department of Education already, the Department of Education should be managing this now.
All right.
The issue becomes they're not communicating back to the school boards. For example, you had 5,000 students that they did not know where they were. 5,000. That was reported in February, and then October was not reported. Where did those 5,000 go? Only 1,200 was found. The other 3,800 was never found. Now, what does that do? It gives the school boards a zero. It counts those students as dropouts. The school boards don't believe they're dropouts. They're probably enrolled in a home study, but it's counting against the school. It's counting against their accountability.
Right.
So what we're trying to do is prevent that so that the schools don't get dinged, you might say, for having a dropout when they're really not a dropout.
All right. Senator Tarbett for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I spoke to a woman involved with the homeschools community, and they were, what she told me was they were against the amendment. They were okay with the bill, but against the amendment. What did you?
Well, I believe they haven't seen all the amendments. I think one of the things they were against was reporting monthly.
Right.
Monthly.
Right.
Okay, that's taken out. It, under the amendment number two, it says immediately upon receipt of a report of attendance or upon receipt of an application for a home study program, provide notification to the city, parish, or other public school system in which the child was most recently enrolled, and if
Okay.
different, the public school system with the child's home address is located. The notification shall include the child's legal name, date of birth, and physical address. Immediately, as used in this item, shall mean within 30 days of the receipt of the report of attendance or an application. So they just have to do it within 30 days,
All
not
right.
monthly.
Well, I'm not going to oppose it, but I know what you're going to say. We'll work with you you'll work with them if they have some issues with it.
No,
Because
and I will. And I had
they
another.
probably didn't know what you're saying, that you were going to delete lines 1 through 7.
Correct.
So-
And I had another legislator on the House side call me today and was stating the same thing. I said, well,
Okay.
you haven't seen the.
All right. Well, let's just
then.
then.
Okay.
All right.
All right. Senator Mizell for a question.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm really glad you did that. But my thought was, my grandchildren are homeschooled. So it's not, I listened to it, and I think there's a perception. My perception has always been that the homeschool parent or a teacher or whatever, they call the department, or their local school, and say, okay, my kids are not in your school, but they are being schooled. This is what we're doing. Is that not the case? Is it not required, or are they not doing it?
If I could, neither. It's not required.
Identify
I'm sorry,
yourself.
Danny Garrett, Louisiana School Board Association. When a student goes from being in a public school to going to a home study program, they have to submit an application to the department. Upon approval of it, that's considered transfer. It's just like the kid left the public school and went to a private school. They are transferring to another school. And they are in that. And they are considered transferred to that school. And that's what alleviates the school district's responsibility for enforcing compulsory attendance, because enrollment in an approved home study program is considered attendance at school, as it should be. It's a transfer to another educational modality. And the issue is that we found in going through is that there were circumstances where a student was approved for home study. Then the department went back and audited their home study approvals. They found a problem with the application that they had approved. So they were contacting the school district and saying, unless y'all can prove that student was really in home study, we're going to call them a dropout. And that just didn't seem to make any sense.
God, I wish y'all would worry about truants the way you're worrying about homeschool students.
Well, and that's the whole point is we are worried about the students that we already have. We're having, at present, in order to avoid that, we're having to go back and try to figure out if a student really was homeschooling that we believe was, because that's the last notice
And
we
what's
got.
I don't want to get into the weeds on this, but what is the criteria when you say you have to approve the application?
We don't approve it. The department.
The
approves it.
department, do you know what the criteria is?
Yeah, there's actually the application's online. I think you can also do it in paper, but they have to provide certain information and to the department, and then the department is supposed to review the application, make sure it's complete and valid before they approve it. And once they approve it, that means that student is not going to be considered truant if he doesn't show up at his local public school. And we get a notice. And one of the things this does is we would like to notice within 30 days of when that application is approved, because then we know. A second thing that has been happening is the home study applications, and I didn't really realize this till we got into it, are actually required to be renewed annually. Now, we have no way of knowing if a student didn't renew. What's happening now is we get a list that says this student's was homeschooled, and was approved. We may, a year or so later or a quarter later, get another list. That student's not a name. The only way we know that
It's not matching
is we'd
up.
have to look at the two and
Right.
compare them, and then we're like, well, so what does that tell us? What we're asking the department to do is, if the student doesn't renew, send us a notice that this student, this name, this date of birth,
So
this,
it would avoid the
So then we
going on
will
the dropout
know-
list.
then where is that student? Because he's ceased being enrolled in our school. It's like he transferred somewhere else. Now, maybe he left homeschool and enrolled in a private school, or he may have left homeschool and moved to Texas. The same thing we would have is if a kid just doesn't show up from one year to the next, we were the last people that had him.
What
So we
about a
have to
kid
figure out
that's
where
in
he is.
private school and starts being homeschooled?
Well, I guess if he ever left us, the issue is if he
It's
was ever
only
with
if
us.
if he's not in the public system.
Yeah, if he was
it's
never in the
not
public system,
under your,
it does never affect us.
okay.
'Cause
But-
he was
but
never
the
on our
whole
roll.
point of this
Right. Yeah.
to clarify the dropout list.
Yeah, to make sure that
But
kids
that's the
that,
point.
that we're not calling kids dropouts who are really not dropouts.
Senator Mizell, if I may say, the homeschoolers, from my conversation with them, they've been concerned about this. They don't want their homeschoolers to be considered dropouts.
No,
So
no.
really, this bill is helping everybody. It's trying to help the homeschoolers, okay, so they're not considered dropouts. It's trying to help the school districts so they can identify really what are the truancies, right? What are if they're in another school, that's fine. But so there seems to be a disconnect. It also says in the law, it says the parent or legal guardian, it says nothing in this section shall be construed to prohibit a child from enrolling in an approved home study program or a non-public school not seeking state approval. The parent or legal guardian responsible for the school attendance of such a child who is between the ages of 5 and 18 shall report the attendance of the child to the State Department of Education within 30 days of the start of the school term as provided in RS 17232. So it seems
Right.
like the state already has the law which they're supposed to be doing, Department of Education. The homeschoolers in non-approved schools seem to have to report by law. We're just trying to connect them and give a report from Department of Education back to the school boards.
So if we're doing it only at the initial withdrawal and the beginning of the year for a new homeschooler, that's right back where we were, where we started. Isn't that right back
I'm
where
gonna
we?
let them-
Yeah. We get the notice, and again, what we would like to do is once they've approved, get us the notice. Then we know this kid's not supposed to be on our
But
roll.
they're still only notifying you one time at the beginning of the school year. That's what I'm saying. At the
Right.
beginning of the school year.
Yeah. Now,
So you haven't changed the means of the time frame for contact or anything with the homeschool. I want it really clear that this,
Right.
because the term tracking scares people.
No, that's not the intent here. It's just so that we have better information, so that we're not subject to having to go back 2 years later and go, well, wait a minute, we think we've changed our mind. He wasn't in homeschool.
Right.
It's like, well, you
Right.
should have told
but
us.
they never, yeah.
Yeah,
okay.
you never told us.
But so you're going to let the people know who have previously, like, so what, I mean, we're going to see this, but what's going to be different to someone who pulls, how are they going to know? Who's going to tell them that they need to do this? How do they know they need to do this?
And honestly, you have to ask the department what their processes are about notifying parents of their obligation to, for example, renew each year. Because I think that's been one of them that we found in looking back at several years worth of audited, is that, and I don't know what their level of communication is with that parent. I know that there were some issues in some prior years surrounding a parent would come in, sit down with the principal, they would make a decision that the homeschool probably was best, and a lot of times the parents would ask the principal to help, so they do it. The department got leery because there were some evildoers out there, and we're all for punishing people who do wrong, who were falsifying applications. Now, if they falsified an application, hopefully it would never have been approved, so it would have never come off our rolls anyway. But one of the things the department has done is said, in order for us to ensure that the application is coming from the parent, we're not going to accept it if it comes from a school board email. And that's fine. It just means the parent will have to do it themselves, and they will have to list their personal email when they log on. And that's fine. But once it's approved by the department, we want to get notice that it's been approved. That means that kid is off our rolls. If that kid is supposed to be back on our rolls, we need to have a notice that he's back on our rolls. And if he didn't renew, and the parents, presumably parents have been told, hey, we don't consider your kid to be enrolled in home study, ergo your kid is truant unless you renew. Because I think technically that's what the law says, is if they don't renew, then technically the kid's not enrolled in home study, so he's technically truant. He's sort of truant from homeschool, sort of. But hopefully they do have some sort of process by which they reach out to the parent and say, look, you just forgot to submit your application this year. I mean,
Yeah, and I know parents who like look at what the states, what they want to make sure their T's are crossed and their I's are dotted. But also the homeschool groups, I'm sure, would notify people, look, this is what we have. Okay, that's fine. I just wanted some clarity about that.
And if there's any changes or ways to make it better, I'm willing to look at it.
I
The
think the
intent of this
amendment
bill, it's not
helped
to,
a lot.
It's not to track, but anyway.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Sir Senator.
All right, Senator Jackson.
Thank you. As I understood it, this was more about truancy than homeschool and public school attendance, right?
Correct.
And so with your amendments, basically you just report whether or not your child is still being homeschooled
Yes, once a year.
once a year so that it won't count against the school districts.
Correct.
I see it as a solution to another issue that we dealt with in the Select Committee on Women and Children. And that was the children who were being abused that were pulled out of school, and nobody was reporting on them, and they were considered dropouts. And then all of a sudden they showed up in DCFS system. And some were considered homeschooled, and then they show up in DCFS system. So I like the fact that, because we're ranked 50th, I think, still in the nation in education. And one of those factors is dropout rate. And so if we're counting students that are being homeschooled as part of the dropout rate, then that's definitely hitting how we look around the country and how attractive we are to business and industry in our different areas. That's one thing in rural areas that we're having an issue with, is the dropout rate. And so I support your amendment at the appropriate time. I would ask for favorable your Senate bill, and at the appropriate time I'd ask for favorable passage for those reasons. That for me, it's not about homeschool or about traditional school. It's more about tracking our students for the reasons I talked about in the Women's Select Committee, for the purpose of also considering how much false reporting, be it whoever's fault it is hitting our educational ratings and thereby affecting our local districts' ability to attract business and industry. And I'm having a major issue in rural areas with attracting business and industry because of how we're ranked educationally.
I agree. Thank you.
All right, Senator Abraham sends up Amendment 2550. Any objections to the adoption of those amendments? Hearing no objections, those amendments are adopted. All right, the board is clear. We do have Dr. Wendy Boudon.
I
Oh, that's you, you wave. Michael Falk, do not wish to speak. Cynthia Posey in support, do not wish to speak. And we've already heard from Danny Garrett. All right, we hear from the opposition, if that's okay, Senator. All right, Ethan Malonzone is here to provide information. And also we have let's hear from Mr. Malonzone. We have Joan Hunt with the department, and Ms. Chloe, do you wish to speak? Okay, yeah, we get you afterwards.
Yeah, we have the department staff up here right now to share some information.
All right, and Thomas Lambert, that would be you. All right, please identify yourself, and you may proceed.
Hello, committee members. Ethan Malonzone, Louisiana Department of Education, representing Bessie. Bessie is in opposition to this bill. We have some concerns, including some legal concerns with some of the federal regulations that we have. Today I have Joan Hunt and Thomas Lambert who can explain some of the issues that we have with the legislation.
Okay. To start, just to get some...
Identify yourself for the
Oh, I'm
record.
sorry. Joan Hunt, Department of Education. We have 16,928 homeschool students, and we have 19,580 students in non-public schools not seeking state approval. And one clarification I would like to make, when Senator Abraham was reading from RS 17-221 about the non-public schools not seeking state approval, where it says they notify the Department of Education in accordance with RS 17-232C. When you look at that, what it says is they are obligated to tell us the total number of students in attendance. They do not tell us the children's names, so we do not have those students' names. Also, of course, as y'all are aware, under 1739-14, our student data privacy law, we don't have the names of any students other than the ones in approved home study. And also, to be clear about home study, there's only approved home study to satisfy the compulsory attendance law. Sometimes people say, oh, I'm homeschooling my kids or have them in home study. If they're not in a Bessie approved home study program, they're not satisfying the compulsory attendance law. So there's that piece. With the students who are in non-public schools not seeking state approval, again, we don't know individually who those students are. We only know the number of them. So we could not tell anyone who those students are because we ourselves don't know. We also don't know if they're in compliance with compulsory attendance or not, because you have to look at a definition of a school under 17-236, an adequate physical plant, certified staff. They have to meet at least 180 school days a year. Now, that statute specifically says that children who are in an approved home study program are considered to be in compliance with the compulsory attendance law, just by fact of being an approved home study program. There's no further obligation on them as to instructional minutes or days of instruction or anything like that. That's the way the law is set up. For the children who are in non-public schools not seeking state approval, they may or may not be in compliance with compulsory attendance, but we the department, don't have any way of knowing that. The way the law is currently set up is that, of course, parents are responsible for sending their children to school, be it home study, approved home study, non-public, or public school. After that, it is the obligation of the child welfare and attendance officers who are employed by the local city and parish school boards, are responsible for enforcing compulsory attendance and bringing those cases to court, 17-233, and they're the only ones who get to do that. And that's all set forth in law as well. They're the only ones who have the authority to investigate. So if there's a child present within the jurisdictional boundaries of a city or parish school board, it is the obligation of the child welfare and attendance officer to see if that child is in fact in school, if they're in a non-public school, if they're in public school, or if they're in approved home study school. Now we, the department, do send the superintendent of each local school district each year, quarterly, a report of every child who is in an approved home study program so that they can share that with their child welfare and attendance officers and know that those children are not truant or absent from school because they're in an approved home study program. Now, if the parent, and as for the non-renewal part, we put it in the letter to the parents when they get their approval that this is for 1 year, that they need to apply again the next year if they want to do home study again the next year. We have it on our website. It's, we've done everything we could to convey that this approval is for 1 year only. At the end of that year, and again, we have 16,928 students in approved home study programs. And so if the district does not get that child's name the following year on an approved home study list, that means that child is no longer in an approved home study program. And then then that goes to the child welfare and attendance officer to see if that child is still in the district, if have gone to a non-public school, if something else, or if they're just not being schooled at all. So that's the current setup. So our problem with this law, the way it is written, for one thing, it combines both the home study kids and the kids who are in non-public schools not seeking state approval. We know who the children are in approved home study programs. We do not individually know who the students are in non-public schools not seeking state approval. Therefore, we can't give the districts that information because we ourselves don't have it.
Okay, so what could we do to fix that?
I guess I need to know what we're trying to solve for.
Compulsory attendance.
Compulsory attendance of children in home study isn't an issue because they're already, by the fact that they're in an approved home study program, their parents are in compliance with the compulsory attendance law.
But you just said you don't even know their names.
No, that's the students who are in the non-public schools not seeking state approval. That's a different set of students. They're the students who are in approved home study programs. They are in compliance with the compulsory attendance law, in accordance with law. And we show it both in 17221 and in 17236. It says that students who are in approved Bessie home study program are considered in compliance with
All
the
right,
compulsory
so those
attendance law.
we in good shape with. Let's talk about those you don't know their names.
Okay, that would be the students, as I'm sure you know, we have, there are non-public schools that seek state approval and there are non-public schools that do not seek state approval. We don't even necessarily know all of the non-public schools not seeking state approval unless they register with us and say, we're a non-public school, but we're not seeking state approval. And here's the total number of kids we have in our school, because that's the only thing that the law requires them to tell us, and we can't ask anything further than that because of the student data privacy law. So we only know the total number of those that have actually registered with us and told us that they're a non-public school not seeking state approval.
So this may sound real elementary here. When a kid graduates from a non-public school in this state, they receive a certificate, correct?
Yes, sir.
And that certificate is authorized by the Board of Elementary and Secondary Education, is it
Well,
not?
Again, that depends. If you're an approved non-public school, the diploma issued to those students carries the same weight as a state-issued diploma. If you're in a non-public school that has not been approved by Bessie, then that diploma does not carry the same weight as a state diploma or a diploma issued by an approved public school.
So they get a diploma, it's just not backed by the Board of Elementary and Secondary Education.
So a kid in Louisiana can receive a diploma that's signed by the Board of Elementary and Secondary Education, one, and a kid can graduate from the 12th grade and receive one that's not?
Right. If they're in an approved non-public school or a public school, then it has the weight of a state diploma. If it's in a non-public school not seeking state approval, I don't know what they put on their diploma. I mean, they can get one, but it's just going to say, I guess the name of the non-public school and maybe the headmaster or something like that. I really don't know.
Senator Jackson.
I'm going to probably try to stick to the bill first. So what Senator Abraham is saying, and thank you, because our attorney has showed us the law. Right now, you only submit a number right, to the Department of Education. His scenario, as I understand it, is this. Terry drops out of Ouachita Parish High School. Terry's parent does not inform Ouachita Parish High School. The department is only receiving numbers from you. So Terry is being considered a dropout for Ouachita Parish School District, which hits their number, which hits our state ranking, because the number of dropouts is considered in what our state ranking is in education. So I think what the gentleman is from Lake Charles is trying to remedy is to connect where no one knows where Terry is, but Ouachita Parish High School is still receiving him as a dropout, and it's hitting their school scores and their district scores, thereby hitting our state scores. You understand what I'm saying?
Yes, ma'am. And if I can say, if the child left the school because they went into a Bessie-approved home study program, the school will know that because we notify them.
I know, but you said they're non-approved Bessie programs. So
No, it's not a non-approved Bessie program. There are two separate categories.
Okay.
There are the Bessie-approved home studies
right.
that come to us, and that's the only type of home study that satisfies compulsory attendance law. Then there are the non-public schools not seeking state approval.
And that's what I'm saying.
That's the ones we don't know about. But then that is also the obligation of the child welfare and attendance officers if that child has now left school and they haven't received anything from the department saying that child has gone into an approved home study program, then that child is
Let me understand this. You have the Bessie approved. Under the Bessie approved, do you give numbers for those students? But Bessie knows, and so does Bessie report to Department of Education, not by number but by name, that these students are enrolled in this program?
Well, actually, the Department of it is a Bessie-approved program, but the Department of Education does the
So the
administrative
Department
work.
of Education knows those students are being homeschooled.
Yes, and
Now-
those we know their names and we know their addresses.
So let's go to the non-Bessie approved schools.
Yes.
Under the non-Bessie approved schools, because this logic is going to throw me if this is the case, the parent has to report to the school that they're homeschooling.
No, they're not homeschooling.
Non-approved, whatever it is.
They're a non-approved public school, and the law requires that they report the total number of students to us. They do not report their names or any information
So the
about them.
total number. So again, if Terry leaves Ouachita Parish High School and goes to a non-Bessie approved program, Terry parent never tells Ouachita High School he's been pulled out to go to a non-Bessie approved program. He is showing as a dropout, and that is hitting that school score, the district score, and the state ranking.
And
then we want to expend extra money, because then I hear you saying that it's for who to then go out and look at it?
well, it's not extra money. It's already their job. The child.
No, I understand it's their job, but the job of truancy is a huge job, as we know in this state.
Yes, it is.
So we're unnecessarily adding to that job for them to go out and track a student who should just simply be reported.
Not necessarily, because again, with the non-public schools not seeking state approval, we don't know if they're in compliance with the compulsory attendance law or not. And that's why it's incumbent upon the child welfare and attendance officers to check and see, because if that school's not meeting for 180 days a year and doesn't have an adequate physical plant and doesn't meet the definition of a school, then they're not in compliance with the compulsory attendance
See,
law.
I'm gonna be honest, and I'm not knocking anybody, but that's gonna be a problem for me, because we're allowing these schools to exist in our state.
We do.
But we're doing the extra work to make sure they're existing correctly, and we're not requiring them to report adequately.
The Constitution, okay, that's a good point.
Confusing
Thank
to
you.
me.
The Constitution and statutory law, but the Constitution says that upon application, Bessie shall approve a non-public school if it has a sustained course of study or curriculum at least equal in quality to that of public schools.
I understand. Now,
Okay.
tell me about the
So-
truancy of them.
All right. So no, I actually have thought about this a lot, because I thought, well, should we not even allow, or it's y'all's decision, allow non-public schools who don't seek state approval? Because that group is the one that is.
That's probably where I'm going with this question.
Yeah.
Because it looks like you don't have to seek state approval, but then the state has to go out and ensure that you're meeting 180 days. The state has to go out if a parent doesn't say, hey, I pulled my child out and he's here, and figure out whether the child is a dropout or not. All the while, the school, and we're depending on that with limited resources. Even though it's their job, let's be real, we're adding extra work. And then we're depending on that and hoping that at some point all these students are properly tracked down for the purpose of everything we're doing. And that is my concern. I think, that's why I'm with the gentleman from Lake Charles, because at some point somebody has to report enough for our Department of Education and the schools who are being, taken over, F schools, D schools, right? Based on some of that's based on the dropout rate. I know, but they're coming from public schools that are, getting hit by the truancy issue. And I think that's the issue. There is and even for charter schools, when you look at it, if a student is in a charter school, right, and his or her parent pulls them out, and they put them in this non-approved school, the charter school doesn't have any information from the Department of Education where this child is, because they're submitting a number.
That's right.
And so does it impact, that's what I'm asking, does this impact charter schools too? Like, how far does this reach in trying to determine when a kid leaves your school and goes to this non-public? It does. He's saying yes. So this seems to be impacting everyone.
We are, Thomas Lambert, Department of Education, we are required in our ESSA plan for students who do not meet the compulsory attendance requirement to continue to report them back to the last school that they attended. So unless the program that they are enrolled in meets the compulsory attendance law, we are required to assign them back to the school.
And so what if a student is assigned back to my school and he or she is not there? What does that do for me?
Since the student's not in compliance with the compulsory attendance, they are no longer considered to be in attendance at the school.
And so what happens then?
It can impact the school's graduation rate.
That's what I'm saying. It's still hitting all approved schools, it sounds like. Like, we are sitting doing extra work as a state to track students that we can simply put in statute. If you're in a non-public school, public approved school, Bessie approved school, turn in the names. And then why? And then my question is going to be this: why are they not mandated to report the number of days? Why do we have to go out and track the number of days they're in school?
Because that's in
Yeah, it is too
17232C. Now, if y'all amend that.
Right, that's what you showed me, and that's what I'm concerned about.
That would have to be amended,
is
because
it-
this law, the way it's written, we literally
Is it
cannot
germane
possibly
to
do
this
it.
bill, Ms. Cheryl? Yeah, because I do want an amendment to amend that, because that seems to be the largest gap of what's happening, and I thank the gentleman from Lake Charles for bringing this to our attention. And I understand where the homeschool students are. I get that, but then there's another factor in this that's really probably affecting every school in this state.
Right. But again, the way this law is written, we cannot do this without 232C being amended as well.
I think she's going to be able to do that very quickly, because it's going to be a good fix. And I thank you for, with all your legal knowledge, seriously, for helping us understand this and bringing this to full, attention.
It's a complicated area.
It's very complicated, because you would never think that Louisiana would allow schools to exist in this state, ever, and us not know where our students are.
Have you concluded, Senator?
Yeah, just wait on that amendment.
Senator Mizell.
Okay, I'm sorry. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Back when you talked about the, I'm sorry, I didn't get your name.
Joan Hunt.
Thank you, Ms. Hunt. When you were talking about when the child leaves the school and then it goes to Bessie and then they go back to the original school that the child had left because the child's on the list of dropouts because the parent, whatever.
Yeah.
What's the protocol that takes place? I mean, because at that point, they're, following the law, they could have reported in the total number with no names, which is why that name's circulating in a negative way through the process. So what happens when the department says, "Oh, we had a kid from your school and he's on dropout list"? What does the school do? Do you know what the protocol is? Any of y'all know what the?
I do not.
don't know the protocol of the school.
I'm not sure of the,
I'm not sure I understand the question.
yeah, yes, I was going to say, I'm not sure I understand the question.
Do-
Like, so when the school is notified that they have a child.
That they
who's
had a
dropout-
child who had been previously at their school who's not showing up anywhere anymore.
Okay, then if I were that school district, I would ask my child welfare and attendance officer to go to that child's last known address, and, because they have, when you look at the.
Wait, if you were the school attendance person in that
yeah.
district.
Because
But is
they-
there a protocol that is a department standard? Okay, this is what the school districts are supposed to do.
It's in the
this-
law. If you
Okay,
look
it is in the law.
17230, 17231, and 17232.
Okay.
Talk about the powers and duties of child welfare and attendance officers and their powers to investigate truancy and absent children and all of that. That's already in the law, and that's at a local level. It's not, the department doesn't do that. That's done by the child
And
welfare and
that's when
attendance
any
officers.
child is on the dropout list.
It's when any child is absent from school.
Any child, so it's not.
And it
so-
doesn't have to have been a child that was ever in school. So if you get a report that, you know, some 8-year-old child is just seen wandering around the neighborhood and not in school.
Right,
It is the duty of the child welfare and attendance officer to go and investigate to see.
when
why
they get
that-
a report on that.
Right,
Okay.
to see if the child, they may be in an approved home study program. If so, it
Hey,
ends
wait,
there.
I'm gonna, okay, you're really opening something up.
Oh.
So when there is a report, if I see an 8-year-old wandering around,
Mm-hmm.
you're assuming that the school district attendance person's going to investigate it, right?
The law
But-
requires the school district
Right,
person
right.
to investigate.
But it would get to them from, because I wouldn't call the school district if I saw an 8-year-old wandering around. I would call DCFS. So you would then DCFS calls you? I mean, is,
They would notify the school, they work closely with the school districts, yes,
so then, and then you would go from there.
yes.
This is, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Welcome.
This is just, I just told staff, we're plowing new ground with this. And-
There's a lot of laws that intersect.
Yes, I think when you start saying there's a number and the number has to become a name, there's a reason it's always been where it was a number and not a name.
Yes, there is.
And I think that's going to be an issue anyway.
And to talk about the fiscal note that y'all had mentioned earlier, if we are able to fix this bill and it goes through the process and this would become law, we would then have to hire new staff who would go out and investigate and look for those students. So that's
would be a duplication
which
of-
would
of
exactly.
what the law
so
is
that's
already
why
requiring.
we would have a fiscal note, because we would have to take on more employees to be able to execute that.
Because right now, a truancy report goes through law enforcement rather than you all. So
Well, it
this
goes
would
to the
put,
child
It goes
welfare
to the
and
child
attendance
welfare
officers.
and
Right,
attendance
the child-
officers,
okay.
which are at the local districts.
And remember also, under 1739-14, our student data privacy law, we, the department, other than students in approved home study, we don't have the names and address, we are not allowed to have the names and addresses of individual students.
right. Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. But you do have state directors for child welfare and
We do, yes, and they coordinate with the local child welfare and attendance officers and make sure that
And
everybody's
that's-
doing what they need to do.
and their sole responsibility is child attendance. Attendance, right?
No, not in the sense that they themselves are checking child attendance. They meet with and coordinate with the local child welfare and
Right.
attendance officers.
Right.
Yes.
But that's what they do,
Yes, sir.
working with the locals. So if we fix the bill, why would you need more people to do that?
Well, if we fix the bill, the department wouldn't be the ones enforcing truancy. It would still continue to be the setup that's been in the law for
Right. Forever.
decades, yeah, if not 100 years possibly. The truant officers, as they're commonly called, but child welfare and attendance officers, they're the ones who have that responsibility.
right. Okay, the board is clear. Thank you all very much. Before you come back, Senator, we do have Shonda Coley, and look, it's not your writing, it's my not being able to understand it. Have an information only card, but do wish to speak. Please proceed.
Thank you, Senator, and no problem with that. My name is Karonda Corley. I'm with Step Up Louisiana, and I want to try to clarify some of the things that the Bessie Department was actually trying to explain to you that did not make sense, but I'm going to put it in layman's terms for you. Okay, so when a parent decides that they want to enroll their child into homeschool, they do not necessarily have to go to the local education agency. They can bypass them and they can go directly to the Department of Education and they can enroll their child there. They do, however, have to go to the local educational agency to drop their student. Once they do that, then the parent has the right to choose whether or not they want to use the Bessie approved programs or if they want to use an approved program that is in another state. We do have students right now in the state of Louisiana that are being educated under different educational programs in other states, such as Texas, such as DC and other areas. So those students are then reflected in the non-public school, non-seeking state approved, non-seeking programs. That's what they was trying to explain that they could not explain. They have the numbers, but they don't have the actual names, because those students then become enrolled into state departments in other states, and that state is actually receiving the credit for that child. So the programs that we're using right now in our LDOE department is not something that a lot of parents of children that are homeschooling actually use. And they don't use it because if they have a child with a disability, some of those programs are not accommodating and do not allow those parents to do the accommodations and the modifications, if you will, as needed for that child. So they do seek programs that are in other states to use. Secondly, when it comes to children with disabilities as it relates to our local educational agencies, some of our children with disabilities, if it is not reflected in their IEPs, which is the acronym stands for Individualized Education Plan, then those students are actually disproportionately targeted by child welfare and attendance because their numbers of absentees increase due to their disability. Now, if you look at any of the roles from J Campus, if you will, that a lot of our local education agencies use, child welfare and attendance looks at the number of days absence, and they look at the number of days excused. They do not look at any of the other numbers. So when they see the number that's absent, and if they see that the number excused is 0, then that alerts the child welfare attendance department to actually go after that parent or that family for truancy. Once they go after a parent that's a child with a disability that has an IEP, then that child has to go before a truancy court just like any other child. But that parent does have the right to actually be able to intercept it and go through due process hearings through ALJ. Which is something that most of our regular ed kids cannot do. So the system, as far as it relates for certain students, as you will, as stated in Senator Abraham's bill, the certain students, this can actually impact students with disabilities if they are included as the certain students. So what I would propose that one, we look at that the State Department of Education does not monitor. They do not monitor, they do not implement, and they do not enforce. And as a result of their inability to monitor, this is what the gentleman from Bessie was trying to say, that they would have to hire more people in the State Department of Education, because that was never something that they ever did, which was monitored. They do not monitor the local educational agencies in which they're supposed to. So as a result, we have many students that do fall through the crack that also end up going to truancy court, which is an unnecessary burden on the parent, and unnecessary cost. And some of these children end up going into juvenile detention as a result, because the parents do end up being reprimanded like that. So what do I propose? I would propose, like the gentleman from Bessie states, we would have to actually have a department created at the State Department of Education that actually deals with monitoring. And when I say monitoring, it needs to be more than just monitoring attendance. It needs to be monitoring what the actual State Department of Education, what the actual local education agencies are doing. Because many of our local education agencies are not following the actual laws that our State Department of Education is supposed to make sure that they are adhering to. Last but definitely not least, we have to look at making sure that we don't just get data on certain students, but on all students, because our State Department of Education is supposed to look at all children. And because we only target certain ones, we forget about the other ones, and those fall through the cracks. So any questions that you have, I am more than able and willing to answer.
All right. Thank you very much. The board is clear. Thank you very much for your testimony. All right, Senator Abraham, the close on your bill. Do we have an amendment prepared? Yeah, she's in our office. Do you have it? You can just get it, see if she wants to.
Senator Fields, I still have to clarify some of the things that were said. I think it's important. You know, I say this, I've been in business for myself for a long time, okay? And I like people to bring me reasons they can do something instead of reasons they cannot, okay? Now, I appreciate the School Board Association, I appreciate Bessie, I appreciate Department of Education. I mean, I like all of them because they're educating our children. But I think what we have here, what I've heard just on my 30,000-foot level, is that we're trying to say things, we're trying to give the impression of why we cannot do something, okay? And in this day and age of technology, we ought to be able to do certain things, and we ought to be able to track where our students are. Now, I know that the non-approved, non-public schools did not have to track names and address. I knew that. In my bill, I'm including them, which I think Katrina's going to clarify that. But I'm including them in this, even though I know they're only supposed to have a number. But the homeschoolers, it's not. They report the name and address. I haven't heard from any of the non-publics. I heard from the homeschoolers, so they're doing it already, okay? They're giving the name and address. So I think it's important that we do try to track these people. I don't believe it's going to take an inordinate amount of time to do this. Because if the Department of Education can at least track where they are, we don't have to send somebody on a wild goose chase to find out where they are. Just send the information. Send the information. We don't have to hire officers to track them down. I mean, of course, we have to do that every now and then, but not in this case. That's the point I want to make. The last point is I want to clarify in the law, which I got one attorney and I'm listening to another attorney, but in the law, clarify what the federal rule is. Go ahead, Nick.
That's Wendy, actually.
That's Wendy, okay.
Wendy Bodewell, Louisiana School Boards Association. So just to provide a little bit of clarity in terms of how the data works in counting students as dropouts. For example, a student who exits to non-public, not seeking state approval, is exited from a public school system with a specific code. That code, according to the Department of Education, is an automatic dropout. There's no investigation into whether or not that school is in compliance with compulsory attendance. It is an assumption that they are not. And any student exiting a public school to non-public, non-seeking approval is an automatic dropout according to the department. And whether or not the school system can prove that they're enrolled on an online program out of state, in a different state, or in a school in Louisiana that's not approved, it does not change their dropout status at the local school system. With respect to state-approved home study students, when they exit the public school system, they go to Bessie for the approval application. That application is approved. Under federal ESSA guidance, that student is considered a legitimate transfer to home study. Two issues have arisen which sort of initiated this part of this bill. One is that once a student does that, and the student, for example, does that in grade 9, but the student fails to renew home study in grade 11, by the time the student is supposed to have graduated, the department comes back to the local school system and says, in grade 11, this student failed to renew their home study application. It's 3 years later, prove that they did something else, or they'll be turned into a dropout. So that was one issue that started, this conversation. With regard to what the federal guidance says on home study transfers, I brought it with me. It says that a student who leaves a public high school to be homeschooled would be considered a transfer if the homeschool program meets the state requirements for compulsory attendance or other state laws or policies applicable to home study. So it does appear like there could be some flexibility in terms of how this body identifies compulsory attendance for non-public, non-seeking approval. That might be able to roll in compliance with federal guidance. But to be clear, the state's ESSA plan is always amendable. The state can always request an amendment to the plan, and should the federal government deny that amendment, the state also has the opportunity to maintain two separate calculations, one state calculation and one federal calculation. So just because the federal government may deny something doesn't mean that the state is going to be prohibited from doing so. In fact, Louisiana for many years operated two separate systems, a state and a federal.
All right, thank you.
One short question for
Yes,
Danny.
sir.
I know we're,
Yeah.
go ahead.
No, you,
No, I want you to finish and then I'm.
You know, Abraham Senator, it's a little different when you're sitting down there versus sitting up here. Huh?
No, I would like one point to clarify what the
Please proceed.
federal law says.
yeah, and that's the thing is this. So as Wendy explained, if y'all would decide that attendance at a non-public, non-approved met compulsory attendance, then that kid wouldn't have to be called a dropout. Because if he's really actually, as Ms. Corley explained, if he's really getting educated, but he's getting educated in a modality that the state doesn't actually recognize, he's not a dropout. And so you could do that. And I think, I mean, that was kind of beyond, that's further beyond the scope that started this bill.
Mm-hmm.
But if we want to really make sure we're accurately counting all the kids, it does make a lot of sense, it seems.
Okay.
All right, Senator Jackson, do you have your amendments? And then we got to go. Okay, Tarver cleared the board. Do you have amendments? All right, let's pass the amendments out.
Non-public reporting, non-public.
Well, that's what I think.
All right, Amendment 2614 by Senator Jackson. Senator Jackson, you want to explain or you want to? All right, Senator Jackson.
Members, thank you so much. I am just bringing the amendment to delete that that those who are non-BESI approved give just a number, and they actually give the legal name, date of birth, and physical address of the student who's enrolled. I think that's going to close the gap, not only for our public schools, but our public and non-public charter schools as well, so that when a student leaves their school, this is an immediate reconciliation of where the student is, and that the school that they're leaving from does not get hit with truancy issues and dropout issues. That's essentially what it does.
All right.
And I'm willing to work from here to the floor if the amendment gets on to address any privacy issues that this list be not made public, but for the purpose of counting students,
Well, and Senator, I can tell you, 3914 absolutely would prevent the disclosure of this information.
Okay,
for
so
any
it's
other
already-
purpose. That's what 3914 already does.
And this is, and I'll listen to hear from you on it,
Okay.
Mark. I mean,
No, I'm good.
Senator.
Are there any objections to the adoption of the amendment? Hearing. All right, Senator Tarbert objects. All right, when the secretary calls the roll, if you're for the amendment, vote aye. If you're against the amendment, vote no. Secretary will call the roll.
Senator Jackson? Yes. Yes. Senator Abraham?
Yes.
Yes. Senator Mizell? No. No. Senator Talbot? No. Senator Fields?
Yes.
Yes.
All right,
2 nays.
3 yeas and 2 nays, the amendment is adopted. All right, the board is clear. Senator Abraham moves that Senate Bill 124 be reported as amended. Any objections to reporting the bill as amended? Senator Talbot voted objects to the bill being reported as amended. Secretary will call the roll.
Senator Jackson?
Yes.
Yes. Senator Abraham?
Yes.
Yes. Senator Mizell? No. Senator Talbot? No. Senator Fields?
Yes.
Yes. 3 yeas, 2 nays.
3 yeas and 2 nays. The bill is reported as amended.